Good morning, everyone, and thanks for giving up part of your Saturday to come here. I flew in yesterday from New York City. I've been living there for about 5 years now. I've been in the States for 6, and I moved there, luckily with my job with Jazeera English. And as I've come to learn over the years, Americans are quite caught up in race. What you look like, where you're from, who you identify with. They like to put you in a little box. And when I first arrived, if I had $1 for every time when I spoke to someone and said, "Hi, how's it going?" I got this reaction. "Oh, you're Australian. Do you catch a kangaroo to work?" After that, if I had $1 for that, I'd be quite rich. If I then had another $1 for every time they then followed that up with, "But you look Asian or something, Hawaiian, where are you from?" I'd be pretty wealthy. I could almost retire. And then if I told them that I worked for Al Jazeera and lived in America, if I had another $1 for every time they said, "Holy shit, you work for the terrorists?" I could have afforded to pay for my own flight here and accommodation. I use that to explain that I'm the product of a lot of different cultures and countries and ethnicities. Baxter gave away a lot of the punchlines of my presentation. I was born in Vietnam, brought up in Australia, now live in America and work for an Arab network, so that's quite multicultural. And I wanted to use that as a springboard to talk about this idea of identity and belonging, because that's something that I have really struggled with pretty much my entire life. I was born in Vietnam, and when I was 5 months old, I was adopted into an Australian family. And brought up there. I would be willing to bet that everyone in this room can trace who they are and what they look like to their family, to someone in their family, down their family tree. If you're exceedingly tall, way too short, you think you've got way too much hair, you're very good at maths, or you suck at singing, I can guarantee you could look at someone in your family and say, "That's where I got it from. Thanks very much, Dad, I'm a genius at maths. Screw you, Mum, I don't like my red hair," or "Thank God for my grandfather because I'm an excellent politician." I never had that. I can tell you a few traits about myself. I'm quite loud and obnoxious and a bit of a show-off and a performer, hence journalism in front of a camera. I think I have a certain colour, an olive skin that goes almost black in the summer. And I can sing, I can play sport, and I had, for most of my life, no idea why, where it came from, who it came from, and who I could blame or thank for them. And that's, if you think about that just for a second, what it's like to look at the people who love you at home and who have brought you up, and to see nothing in them whatsoever that resembles you physically or emotionally or psychologically. And that was the story of my life. Now, I know I've had a very unusual upbringing, and I was very lucky that Al Jazeera allowed me to make a documentary to explore these ideas. And for most of my life, I pretty much was in denial about the fact that I was Asian, because I was brought up in Australia and wanted to be like everybody else. I'll talk about that a bit later. And this documentary, I initially approached as a journalist. I thought, yep, I'm going to go into this. I'm going to do it from a third-person point of view. I don't need the closure here. I'm fine with it. And then once I got into it and started talking to other people involved in the Operation Babylift, meeting other people, I realised it was actually a very personal journey. And for a second, just for a moment, I freaked out, because as a reporter, it's my job that you don't know anything about my personal views about a story. I get to tell you the facts. If I'm reporting for the United Nations, I can tell you what's happening in Syria from a diplomatic point of view. That doesn't mean you know anything about me. It doesn't mean you know what my favourite colour is, where I was brought up, and what my deepest, darkest fears were. And that's what this documentary brought out. It was very confronting, but it ended up being quite cathartic. So I'm going to show you a few clips from the documentary to help tell this story and explore those themes I talked about. The Vietnam War ended 38 years ago, just gone, April 30th in 75. And it's a war that there's a whole generation of kids and people who don't know anything about it. The wars today are Iraq and Afghanistan, unfortunately growing Syria as well. But the Vietnam War is starting to fade. It's kind of like a reference in Hollywood movies, and a Vietnam veteran is someone we don't know well and they're dying, people who served in the Vietnam War. So there's not a lot known about that. So the first clip I want to show you is a very quick history lesson about the Vietnam War and how Operation Babylift came to come out of that right at the end of 1974. If we can show the first clip, thanks, dear.
In the closing chapter of a war that had raged for 20 years, Saigon was about to fall to the communist North Vietnamese army, the NVA. Their enemies, South Vietnam and America, claimed that losing to the NVA would trigger a domino effect and all of Southeast Asia would topple into communism. Saigon was in complete chaos as the communists closed in. This was the chaos I was born into. I was given up to an orphanage for adoption only a few months before Saigon fell on the 30th of April. The war ended that day. I had no mother, no family, and nowhere to call home. I was a war orphan. There were thousands of us. The Americans claimed that once the North Vietnamese took Saigon, they would hurt us, maybe even kill us. They insisted we had to be flown out of the country to escape, and there was no time to lose. This evacuation would become known as Operation Babylift, the biggest international removal and adoption of children ever undertaken.
Mr. Ford announced an airlift to the United States from Vietnam.
I have directed that money from a $2 million special foreign aid children's fund be made available. I have also directed American officials in Saigon to act immediately.
Dozens of planes prepared to transport 3,000 kids in April 1975, and I was one of them.
What's the condition of this baby?
They've all got scabies and infections. They all have quite a lot of bronchitis.
This is like this in a lot of orphanages.
Yes.
The Babylift dominated world news, and Western charities running orphanages in Vietnam threw themselves into getting children ready to leave. America and her allies in the war, Canada, Europe and Australia, all agreed to welcome the orphans to their shores. We were flown out of Vietnam and scattered across the globe. Most of us left without any documents to identify who we were, not even our names. Less than 24 hours after President Ford announced Operation Babylift, the first plane left Vietnam, heading for the USA. In a huge panic, the Americans loaded more than 200 orphans onto a Galaxy military aircraft. But within minutes of takeoff, the rear door blew off and it crashed in a rice field just outside Saigon. There was no official list of passengers, but it's estimated 180 children and adults were killed.
There's not a day, I think, that almost goes by when I think, what if I'd been on that first plane? The randomness of how I came to be in Australia was literally, the orphans were scooped up from orphanages and medical centres and clinics and rounded up as part of Operation Babylift, and it was this baby over there, that one there, literally randomly assigned. If I had been on that plane, there's probably, I don't know my maths, I was never good at that, thanks Dad, probably a less than 2/3 chance that I would be here speaking to you today, because most of those babies on that plane was killed. And that's probably the first sliding door moment of my life when it could have turned out very, very differently, just being part of Operation Babylift and ending up not on that plane, but on the one that went in the end to Australia. Most of the babies from Operation Babylift did go to America, and there was a lot of adoptions there. There was a couple of planes, though, that went to Australia, and that's really what put me on the next path of my life. If we can show the second clip, please.
This is the earliest photo I have of me as a baby. Someone has written my name, Kamtol, and my date of birth. I don't know who took this picture, nor whose hand is reaching out to me. And I don't know where it was taken, in Vietnam or in my new home, Australia. I was on the first plane load of orphans to land at Sydney Airport. I was in bad shape. Many of the Operation Babylift children were suffering from malnutrition, pneumonia and dysentery. 6 of the babies on my flight died from their illnesses. I was adopted by Basil and Robin Turner, who had 3 daughters of their own. I became the 4th Turner girl and given a new name, Catherine. I was raised in the countryside. My new family brought me back to health and did what they could to help me adjust. A brown child in white Australia.
Now, the phrase white Australia is important to my life because that was literally a policy in Australia where only white people could vote. That was still happening in the 70s. So when I was adopted into Australia, it was a very different country to where it is now, and it was a very different world back then as well. There was a thing called the yellow peril, which was a phrase used in Australia to talk about the Asians who were invading Australia, whether it was for the gold, for the mining, or from adoption such as mine. And Australia back then was a very racist country. There's no two ways about it. And it still is, in a different way. But back then, it was predominantly a white Australia. And I grew up in a town of about 25,000 people. And there were maybe 10 other Asian kids there. But they were part of a family. And they might have run the local Chinese restaurant. There was certainly no one who had my story. And everyone knows, I'm sure everyone here has a story about how they were bullied at school. Whether you were fat, orange hair, you didn't have the right clothes, you had daggy sneakers, whatever it was. At that time, in the 70s, my experience of bullying was based on the way I look. And if you're teased because of your fat, you can lose the weight, you can get skinny. If you're teased because you have short hair, you can grow it out. If you are teased because of the way you look and your race, that's something you can't change. And I have very vivid memories of trying to get rid of the fold over my eyes, which is an Australian trait, hating so much my brown skin. People would say, oh, you've got a great tan, and I would hate it. I would give anything to be blonde and blue-eyed. The end result, or the long-term effect of being teased mercilessly about how you look and not being able to go home and talk to someone who understood the same thing, to say, Mum, can you believe it? This guy called me a black chink today. And have that person understand and go, don't worry, darling, it's fine, because they don't understand. The end result of that is I ended up turning out to be racist against my own people. I did not want to be Asian. I hated them. I wanted to be this Aussie girl who played cricket, who went surfing, who played sport. The only thing that gave it away that I wasn't Australian was my looks, and therefore I turned against it. And any time anyone tried to talk to me about being Asian, about being different, where are you from, I hated it, and I became very aggressive and angry about my background. I wish I'd used to write in my diary, I wish I'd died in the war. I don't want to be among these people. Why do I feel like a freak because I'm so different? And that is how I grew up. And probably it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I started to accept that, hey, it wasn't so bad. I'd grown up in this small country town. I ended up moving to Sydney, which was a little bit more multicultural, certainly more Asians there. And I started to realize, hey, we're not all so bad. Some guy would whistle at me in the street and I'd be like, you talking to me? Oh, that's all right, it's not so bad. It's that acceptance. And so I started to feel like I belonged, but I still wasn't fully accepting of the way I looked and the fact that I was not that Aussie blonde kid. That's a struggle that I've had, still have today, because I forget, unless I'm in front of a mirror, that I'm not actually Australian. The idea of what an Australian is today has changed now because everyone there has come off the boat or plane from somewhere. It's an island of migrants. But back then it was certainly felt that if you weren't white or Caucasian, that you were the outsider. Now, the whole premise of Operation Babylift that I was told from the beginning, from World Vision, which is the orphanage that I was in, and also my parents, was that we were all saved. It was a mercy mission, humanitarian. It had to happen, that if we didn't leave, if I wasn't saved, I would die. The communists would come after me. We'd all be in trouble, and it had to happen. That was in our best interest. And when I made this documentary, I wanted to question that and to see if that was actually how history had portrayed it and whether that was true. Now, most of the people in the American government who were part of the Operation Babylift, how it came to be and the execution of it, have died. But I did find one guy in Los Angeles who was part of the Operation Babylift exercise and how it came to be. He was part of actually bringing the idea to life. And I tracked him down in LA, and he had a fairly confronting revelation for me, which questions the whole idea of the Americans saving all these precious little babies. Next clip, please.
The American Embassy in Saigon. What he told me was shocking. We orphans hadn't been in danger from the communists. That was a lie to persuade American politicians to spend more money on the war and South Vietnam would be saved. It didn't work, but in front of the world's cameras, President Ford tried to spin Operation Babylift as a victory in the face of inevitable defeat.
The orphans weren't in danger. There were lots of Vietnamese who were, people who had worked for us, and we were getting signals out of the Communist Command through our secret agents and other sources that the Communists were considering seriously killing the collaborators who had worked with the Americans. Once we were able, under cover of a baby lift or several baby lifts, to begin moving Americans out of the country and Vietnamese, then it was unstoppable. So yes, you were our fig leaf. You were a way of making the world think, number one, Saigon was worth saving because of all these beautiful little children like yourself. Your fate would be in communist hands if you were left there. There was a term we used for people like you, children of the dust. Those were the orphans of war. And they were the least among us, and nobody cared about them, really.
It's really hard. I'm listening to you, I'm hearing the words, I'm trying to put them in context, but to be honest, it makes me... I don't know whether to be angry or upset about what you're telling me. I don't know what to do with it. What am I supposed to think?
Let's face it, the Vietnamese were always pawns in somebody's game throughout the war. The Americans were there not for the Vietnamese. They were there to play out some notion of geopolitical balance of power politics. So it was nothing new that we were using Vietnamese, young and old, one way or another, to accomplish hidden purposes. But to use children, frankly, it was the only way.
That interview really upset me, and I thought I could go into it not being affected by it, but he was so direct and brutal in his description of what had gone on, and had no remorse, no sense of that what he'd done was wrong. He doesn't know anything about me. He didn't know that I actually had quite a well-adjusted life, but I kept thinking of the babies from Operation Babylift who had an awful upbringing. Maybe their adoption wasn't successful. Maybe they've always felt abandoned and they've never found their true place in the world. Maybe they've always wanted to go back to Vietnam and find out about their background, their heritage. And that guy was one of the ones from the US government who was part of this lie, basically, I think, this trick to make the Americans look good right before Saigon fell, and they were trying to win a PR war in a war that they were never going to win. That was one of the most difficult interviews I've ever done. I'm going to hurry this on because I know I'm running over time. As Baxter said, I was another piece of sliding doors. I was very lucky to find my Vietnamese mother. When she left me the adoption at the orphanage, she left me with a letter saying she gave permission for me to be adopted. She had her name, her date of birth, my name, my date of birth, and that's gold. In Vietnam, a lot of babies were just abandoned on doorsteps, thrown in the streets, given to orphanages with no identity whatsoever. This was like winning the lottery, and it made it much easier for me to be able to track down and at least start to look for some member of my family. Incredibly, my two Australian parents, my mother and father, were with me when I met my Vietnamese mother for the first time, and this is the result. I'm waiting for what hopefully will be my mother to walk in that door. She was supposed to be here about half an hour ago, so the suspension's quite building. I feel sick in the stomach. I don't know what to expect. I don't know what she's going to look like. I hope it's her. It sounds like it would be. But it's like I've been waiting 30 years for this moment.
It came out here, and this one had kind of old, and she had plastic surgery on that.
In this one moment came the answer to the biggest question of my life. And with it came 1,000 new questions. I discovered I have a Vietnamese family. 2 half-brothers, some nephews, and a grandmother. And my Australian parents were just as excited as I was to find them. They had always hoped this would happen. My birth mother Na told me that my father was an officer in the South Vietnamese Army. He was married when they met, and I'm the result of their affair. He died after the war. My reunion with my mother was nothing short of a miracle. We had both believed the other was dead. Now, 30 years after we were separated, we were very much alive and together.
Ciao, Deb. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
When she was 20, Adoptee believed the rumours that her child would be harmed.
Can you show me?
The father of her 3-year-old daughter, Phung Mai, was an American soldier.
This is in 1 month when she was born, you know, a month.
Little baby. Oh.
And this is when I work in Long Beach Post,
Oh.
you know, telephone up exchange.
Telephone exchange. Look at you. I bet you had a lot of men asking you out on dates, huh?
I think so.
Yes, I'm not surprised. Very nice. Wow. See this photograph? This is when Deb's baby was about 3 years old. She's written a message on the back. It says, "Baby, I love you, but I've got to let you go for you to save your life. For you to get out of this terrible country so your life can be better."
In late April 1975, just as the last of the Operation Babylift planes were leaving for America, Deb made the agonising decision to give Phung Mai up for adoption. But she returned to the orphanage to see her one last time.
Đi đừng có tới nữa. Nếu mà tới nữa thì con bé nó cứ khóc. Đó. Cô mới đành cô đứng dậy cô đi về, nhưng mà cô không dám đi ra cổng, cô chỉ đi ra phía sau. Cô nói thôi giờ để mẹ đi ra sau, mẹ đi rửa mặt. Thì con bé nó làm như nó có linh tính, nó bảo chứ mẹ đi lẹ lẹ đi nghe không. Thì cô đi đằng sau, cô mới lòn ra chỗ trước này cô đi ra. Thì mới vừa ra tới cổng là nó la lên, nó bảo là mẹ đừng bỏ con. mẹ đừng bỏ con này kia. Nó thì một lần nữa là cô khóc từ đó về nhà. Đến khi cô về đây, ba cô nghe được, ba cô giận cô 1 tháng trời luôn. Lạy như là sao cho cháu đi. Mà ngày nào cô cũng khóc. Rất là hối tiếc, rất là có lỗi. Tại vì mình nghĩ là cái đứa con mà mình mong muốn mình, nhưng mà cô chỉ sợ là nó không hiểu rồi nó sẽ hận mình, phải không?
My mother was also very afraid that I would be angry, that I would hate her for giving me up. But I understand. And maybe your daughter will as well. Because war is awful. And you did what you thought was right.
Cô sợ là sợ như vậy. Là mình cho tới ngày chết mình cũng không biết, không thấy là con mình.
The communists never came for adoptee. They never tracked down mixed-race children, and they never harmed the orphans of Vietnam.
So that was an incredible moment. My mother is a very cool woman, like I said. I made another documentary and she got to fly out to Australia and meet my Australian parents and see my life there, which helped her give an understanding of why I'm the way I am and how I turned out to be the person that I am. And so I guess, just in case we don't get a chance to roll the next clip, this idea, which why I think Tamer wanted me to first speak here, was to think about this idea of belonging and identity and adoption. I don't think we'll ever see another Operation Babylift in our lifetime. There's just too much controversy about it. There's too many criteria now about adoption, even just for parents who want to adopt, say, a child from China. Certainly not on a mass level like that. Think about Haiti, when there was some Americans who tried to rescue some babies after the earthquake, and they were actually stopped on the border going into Dominican Republic, and you have to leave a child in their own country. That was the thinking. And I guess today, the idea of inter-country adoption is one that I still struggle with. If you take a child from China and put them into a home in Cambodia, there are similarities, physical similarities, cultural similarities, where that child can blend and feel that sense of belonging. But if you take a child like me or a child from Africa and put them in Sweden, there's going to be problems. There's going to be emotional disconnection, physical problems with looking at someone and wondering, why don't I look like you? Do I belong with you? And that is something that no amount of love from a parent can really replace or change. And that's probably not the one thing that adoptive parents want to hear, because they go into this with the best of intentions. But I guess part of the idea of what I wanted for you to think about is, when you look around your family, you are very, very blessed to know that you've come from somewhere. You can look into the eyes of your ancestors and see them. And the idea of adopting, while very noble and usually done with the best of intentions, can have huge, sometimes traumatic consequences. And if you're ever thinking, or you know someone who wants to take a child from another country into their home and let them into their hearts, again, a very noble idea, but there has to be a level of awareness about what that child has gone to. Most adoptive parents come in and think it's their moment, their bundle of joy, whereas actually the child is probably day one of the most traumatic experience of their life, which has been separated from their family in their hometown. But thank you very much for your patience and listening.